Well, good morning. My name is Chad. I'm one of the pastors on staff. I'm grateful that I get to be with you today here in worship and study God's Word. We're in a 17-week series right now. We're going through the book of John. The series is called In the Flesh. We started this back at Christmas, and we're going to be in it until Easter. And it is all about the life and the ministry and the mission of a man named Jesus. Last week we went through John chapter 6. This morning we're going to do a little bit of a flyover, a little bit of an overview of where we've been and try to pull out a central theme. And then we're going to do a deeper dive in chapter 9. A central theme that we can see so far and where we've been, starting in chapter 1, kind of moving into where we are today into chapter 9. The theme is the identity of Jesus. It's just a big one. All around some questions like, who is Jesus? What is he about? What is he saying? What is he doing? Who is he claiming to be? And by what authority is this man given to do any of this? Who is this Jesus guy? His identity is a major theme in the book of John, at least up to where we are today. And one of the major questions that people are asking about Jesus, lots of people, because there's a large crowd of people that are following Jesus, especially at this point in the story. All sorts of people are crowding around him, asking the same question about his identity. Who is this guy? Jesus wasn't bashful about letting people know who he was. He did so early and often. He showed the crowd who he was. What is it that we've seen so far from Jesus in the book of John? Here's a few things that we've seen. We've seen him perform miracles. We've seen him turn water into wine. We've seen him heal the sick, feed thousands of people with a little boy's lunch. We've seen him teach small crowds. We've seen him teach big crowds, hungry crowds, angry crowds. We've seen him restore a lame man's ability to walk again. And then we saw Jesus turn around and walk on water himself. Then also we've seen him return value to those who had lost their dignity and to restore love to those in society who said was unlovable. Yeah, Jesus is at zero problem at all showing us exactly who he is and what he's about. He's also told us who he is early and often. Look at some of the titles that Jesus wears so far in the book of John. What are we seeing that he said? We've heard that he is Jesus of Nazareth. We've heard that he's a teacher. We've heard that he's a rabbi, that he's the Lamb of God, that he's the living water, the Messiah, the Holy One, the Christ, the King of Israel, and the Son of Man. He's letting this crowd of people and us know right out of the gate who he is. This is a big theme found in the book of John. But where we are now in the story, the question starts to shift just a little bit. I mean, the question in itself is essentially the same. It's all around his identity. But the question shifts just a little bit because now for the crowd, there's a little bit more personal ownership on how they answer this question. Here's what I mean by that. There's no football this week. I just need everybody to know that. There's some people who are like, yes, and there's some people like, I got to wait. Okay, there's a football game next week. A week from today, it's Super Bowl Sunday. I think many of us are aware of that. This past week, some of us have been gathering data about this game, because we don't even know who's playing. Some of us are like, who's playing in the Super Bowl? I just need you guys to know. The Kansas City Chiefs are representing the AFC, and the San Francisco 49ers are representing the NFC. They're going to play in the Super Bowl next Sunday, okay? Now, this week, it's all about who's playing, who plays for what team, how good are they, who do you think's going to win, and then it starts becoming like this personal investment, and you start caring about things that you never really cared about. Some of us are like football. I'm a Vikings fan. At this point, I don't care who wins, but at some point down the line, I'm going to be rooting for a team, right? So there's a little bit of personal investment. Now, this year's a little bit different. There's some people in our country, even globally, that are now Kansas City Chiefs fans. It's crazy, right? Like these worlds colliding, like there's this whole other storyline coming along, and we get it, right? Like Travis Kelce is the tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, and they're playing in the Super Bowl, and he's got this dynamic relationship with who? No, Jason Kelce, his brother. He is a national treasure. We need to protect that man at all costs. He is the GOAT, okay? So, like, why do I say that? Jesus has said it, and he has shown us in so many different ways so far in the book of John. exactly who he is. And he's not done doing this by any stretch. But we do see a shift in the question that the crowd is having to answer about Jesus, because now it's not so much about who is he, it's becoming who do you say Jesus is? And this is where we find ourselves as we do a little bit of a deeper dive in John chapter 9 today. With that question in mind, don't let go of it. Who do you say Jesus is? Because the crowd was wrestling with this, and it's a question that we have to wrestle with as well. Before we jump into John chapter 9, though, we got to talk about another subgroup, this group of people that are in the crowd who's also wrestling with the same question around Jesus' identity. It's the Pharisees. The Pharisees, the more they see and the more they hear from Jesus, the more they grow to hate him, okay? Like they are the Grinches of the group at this time. They hate Jesus. Jesus and the Pharisees were having this cat and mouse back and forth game that it continues to gain speed, and we see it become even more aggressive here in 7, 8, and 9. In fact, after eluding a trap that they tried to set for Jesus in John chapter 8 with the adulterous woman, the Pharisees point blank asked Jesus a question. They're like, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? And Jesus looks them dead in the face and said, who do I think I am? I am. This is a big statement for Jesus. This is another way for him to show us, including the Pharisees, who he is. He is God in the flesh. Why is this such a big statement? Because this was the very name that God gave Moses to tell Pharaoh just exactly who it was that sent him to free his people back in Exodus. And he says, who do I say sent me? He said, tell him I am sent you. And so when he says this, it's like a mic drop. It's like this, oh, he did that? Whoa. Okay, so Jesus, he's now in a predicament in the back end of 8, and these guys, they pick up the stones and they want to try to kill him. But Jesus somehow gets away. I don't know how. He's kind of like a ninja in that way. And this is where he lands and where we find him in John chapter 9. And it's right here in John chapter 9 where Jesus says, okay, I'm about to put my identity and my mission on full display for everybody to see right here in the flesh. I'm about to show you not just who I am, but why I'm here. So when you have a decision to make, when you've got a decision to make about me, you're going to have everything you need to make that call for your life, because this is now moving to a personal decision. Not just who is he, but who do you say he is? Let's read in John chapter 9, starting in verse 1. I'm going to read 34 verses. It's a haul, so just hang on with me. It's good. John chapter 9, starting in verse 1. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. And as long as it's day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Pause. Here again, we see Jesus just dropping these moments in of like, who is he? Who is he? This is a big one right here. He says he is the light of the world. Having said this, he spit on the ground. He made some mud with the saliva. He put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam, which that word means sent. So the man went and he washed and he came home seeing. I think there should be an exclamation point after that. I don't know why, but he says he is seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that it was. Others said, no, it only looks like him. But he himself insisted, I'm the man. How then were your eyes open, they demanded. He replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, and so I went and I washed, and then now I can see. Well, where is this man? They asked him. I don't know, he said. So they brought him to the Pharisees. They brought the man to the Pharisees who had been blind. And the day on which Jesus had made the mud, he opened the man's eyes. It was on the Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him, how had he received his sight? He said, he put mud on my eyes, I washed, and now I can see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. Listen, here's another quick thing. Jesus was a bit of a repeat offender. And this really rubbed the Pharisees the wrong way, okay? 7 different times in the Gospels, Jesus performs a miracle on the Sabbath. And it drove the Pharisees nuts. And this is what happens yet again. And they say, but others ask, how can a sinner do such miraculous things? So they were divided. Finally, they turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes that were opened. Well, the man replied, he's a prophet. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight, so they sent for this man's parents. And they asked, is this your son? Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that he can now see? Parents respond, we know he's our son, and we know he was born blind, but how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we do not know. Ask him. He is of age and he can speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For already the Jews had decided that if anyone were to acknowledge that Jesus was the Christ, they would be put out of the synagogue. That's why his parents said, he is of age, ask him. A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God, they said. We know this man is a sinner. He replied, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. The one thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. They then asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered, I've told you already, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become one of his disciples too? They didn't like that. Then they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciple. We're disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. The man answers, now that's remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And at this point, here's how the Pharisees replied. You're steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And then they threw him out. They threw him out. So what is it that we're seeing from Jesus here? What is he showing us and what is he telling us about his identity and about his mission? Here's one thing he's showing us, that we have a sin issue. We have a sin issue. And Jesus himself came here in the flesh to deal with it. We have a sin issue and Jesus is here to deal with it. Where do we see this? Right out of the gate in verse 1. When his disciples asked the question, Jesus, who sinned? Is it this man who sinned, or was it his parents that he would be born blind? Now, at this time, I just need you to know this is not a weird question that the disciples are asking. It's just not. The Jews believed in what was called the law of retribution. And the law of retribution means this. If you're suffering, it must be because of some sin in your life, either because of a sin that you did or because of something maybe your parents had done. It's not a weird question that they were asking Jesus. It was a part of their belief. It's not really that weird of a question for us to ask today, because I think we still think like this in some terms, because here's what we know. We know that there is a direct effect to our personal sin. I mess up, I sin, I make a mistake, I make a bad choice. There is a result, there is a consequence, there is an effect to my personal sin. We know that. That's true. We also know that there is an indirect effect from sin when someone else makes a choice and it gets on us. Whether we like that or not, that is true. But Jesus is broadening their view of sin. Not just their view, our view. He's broadening our view of sin. And he said, yep, I get it. Sin has a direct effect and an indirect effect on us all. That's true. But the overall effect of living in a fallen and broken world, well, that's real too. Sometimes we want to place the blame of a tragic thing that we are suffering through or that we've had to suffer through on a person, whether it be another person or even ourselves. But Jesus says that not every pain or every burden that we have or that we have to carry, you can point a finger at someone for it, including you. And so we see Jesus do what? Jesus says it's neither his fault or his parents' fault, but so that the work of God might be displayed in this man and through this man's life. So what does this mean for us? Well, one, Jesus debunks their theology that every misfortune is God's punishment for you, for your sin, or for someone's sin close to you. I think we need to let that sink in a little bit, especially some of us today. I think we need to hear the truth that Jesus is telling us and even showing us why he's here to deal with sin for us. Because I think in some ways there's a few of us who might be carrying the weight and the pain of a tragic thing that happened to you, and you might just be convinced that it's your fault. That God's punishing you for a sin somewhere along the way, either your sin or someone else's sin that's close to you. And Jesus here, he comes along and he says, listen, that's just not true. This man's blindness was not his fault. And so that means not every condition is related to a personal sin of ours. It's just because sin has corrupted and broken this world. And that's why Jesus says, I'm here. That's why I'm here. Because there is an issue of sin, and I am the one that has to deal with it. The number is 42. My parents were 18 and 19 when they got married. They were children. They were kids. They had me at 20 and 21. They had my brother Brad at 24 and 25. I was 4 years old when my brother Brad was born. My brother was 6 weeks old. My parents put me and my brother to bed. And my mom didn't wake up. Like she woke up because she recognized that my brother hadn't woken up for a feeding. So she went in to feed him. And when she went into the room, Brad wasn't breathing. He was unresponsive. And so my brother, 6 weeks, I was 4. My parents just kids. My brother Brad died of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And can I tell you that the weight of that tragic thing impacted our family still to this day? I mean, death has a sting, y'all. It just does. And I know that my mom, she carried that burden and that pain like she was at fault. Like that she messed up, that she somehow, and it wasn't. But that's how she wore it. And my mom passed away several years ago. And I just hope and I pray, and I know his idea of better is always better than ours, but in my mind, I have this moment that I just see my mom entering into heaven and Jesus being right there to welcome her in. And she was 4'9", so she's just a little girl. And I just see Jesus bending down, giving her a hug and putting his hands on her face. And just looking at her and go, oh, little Pammy. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. Come here, there's someone who wants to see you. I think for some of us, we need to rest in this truth from Jesus right here. That not every tragic thing that we carry or we go through can be blamed on you or someone else. It's just because we live in a fallen and broken world. But I got good news. That sin issue in all of our lives, Jesus is here to deal with it. The other thing that we see that Jesus is showing us is that whatever the enemy meant for evil, Jesus wants to use it for his good. So whatever tragic thing you're going through, Jesus wants to redeem it, and he wants to use it as an opportunity to reveal his power, his glory, and his identity. He wants to get in there and he wants to get his hands dirty. He wants to show us who he really is and why he came here and what he wants to do with us and through us. And he wants to rescue us from this effect of sin. And that's exactly what we see him doing right here in the next verse. Look at verses 6 and 7. It says, having said this, Jesus spits on the ground. He makes mud with the saliva and he puts it on the man's eyes. And then he says, go. He tells him to wash in the pool of Siloam, which that word means sent. So the man, he goes and he washes and he comes back seeing. Okay, can we just be honest? This is crazy. Like, this is crazy, right? Like, it's just you and me talking. This is a crazy story. And I think sometimes we read this story and we're like, oh yeah, no big deal. That's what happened. He spit in the dirt. He made some mud. He wiped it on this dude's eyes and then he went and walked in. Like, that's crazy. It's incredible. Kind of gross. But it's crazy. Jesus spits in the dirt, makes mud, cakes it on his face, puts it in his eyes, tells him to go wash at the pool of Siloam, which for the record, they are in the Temple Mount area at this point. Jesus, his disciples, and the man born blind, they're at the Temple Mount area. And the pool of Siloam would have been about a quarter of a mile walk for this man, which means that's him doing a lap over there at the track around the football field across the street. Like, he had to go for a pretty good walk with all this mud in his eyes and in his face. And then he goes and he washes, and he comes back and he can see. He's healed. This is a wild, wild story. And I got lots of questions about it, but the biggest question I got is why? Like, really? Like, why? Why did Jesus use the dirt and the mud and the spit? Well, maybe Jesus is trying to show us something here. Like, maybe he's trying to reveal yet again who he is and what he's about, that he's actually God in the flesh. Think back to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, when God created Adam, it says that he first forms Adam out of the what? The dirt, the dust from the ground. Maybe this is a moment where the Creator, God himself, right here in the flesh, the Creator is creating something new in this man, and he's restoring him back to how he was supposed to be all along. Maybe it is a glimpse of his divinity. Maybe there's even more going on than that. I mean, Jesus could have healed this man a number of different ways, right? Like, we've seen him speak, and when he speaks, people are healed. Miracles happen. We've seen him touch people, and things just happen. There's a lot of different ways that Jesus could have done this. We've already seen him do several. Jesus could have clicked his heels together twice and wiggled his nose, and this man could have been healed. So why the mud and the spit? You got to remember something about this crowd. This crowd. People weren't just trying to answer the question of who is he at this point. We're too far into the story. They've seen too much. They know too much. They've heard too much. They're now not just trying to say, who is he? They're trying to figure out what to do with him. I mean, there's some personal ownership and kind of an investment and kind of a decision that they're going to have to make. Like, look, who do I say this guy is? And so they're trying to figure him out now. They're trying to figure him out. Like we would a magician with his tricks. Right? Like, they're trying to find some algorithms. They're trying to find some patterns or cadences so that they can look and go, okay, I see what he's doing here. The card's actually in his other hand. Oh, no, it's up his sleeve or it's behind his back. But I've got this guy figured out. I know what he's doing. I can put my finger on that. That's what they're trying to do. But here's the reality. Jesus isn't a magician, right? He's God. He is God, and they can't figure him out because he's always more. He's beyond us. He's bigger than us. He created us. There is no way, as one being the creation, could ever wrap our minds around our Creator. He is God in the flesh, and he is keeping them on their toes. It's just yet another way that he's showing us all. Look, how many other ways do you want me to show you? I am God right here in the flesh. Another interesting thing about the spit and the dirt and the mud and the going and the washing, this man was blind, right? We know that. He was blind, but he wasn't deaf. This guy wasn't deaf. Why does that matter? It matters because he heard the conversation that Jesus and his disciples were having. He heard the question they asked. He heard their response. He heard Jesus as he works up a spit. Let that sink in for a second. Like, put yourself in the story. Put yourself in the seat of this guy who's blind, but he can hear what's happening. And he's like, hey, watch this. Something good's going to happen. And he starts hocking a loogie and spitting in the dirt and making mud. And I need you to know, like, the amount of mud he made enough to make the Pharisees mad. Because they said that he was doing something on the Sabbath. Now, he performed a miracle on the Sabbath, but he also said, the Pharisees said that he had produced so much mud from his spit and the dirt that was we call that work, because you did too much on the Sabbath. Like, how much mud did he make? How much bubble gum did he chew? Like, I don't understand. Like, how? This guy heard all of this happening. He heard him kicking the ground. He knew what Jesus was doing. Why is that important? Because he let him. He let him do this. Don't miss that. This man, he was blind, but he was a blind what? A beggar. He was a blind beggar. So that means when they met each other, his hands were what? His posture was right here. He was a beggar, and his posture, after everything that he was hearing Jesus do, his posture never changes. And we can't miss that, because I believe something important here is his posture. This man's posture was his power. His posture was his power. Why? Because he was desperate. He was desperate before the Lord. He didn't ask for a different method of a miracle. He probably had heard of other ways Jesus had performed miracles. But he didn't ask for a different method of a miracle here. He didn't act repulsed when Jesus was doing what he was doing. He didn't push Jesus away when he tried to put the dirt in his eye. And he didn't tell Jesus to go take a hike when Jesus told him to take one to go wash up. He simply let Jesus do his thing. And he never changes his posture. Why does that matter? Because when you're desperate enough for God, then you don't care about the method that he chooses. You just want his miracle. You just want the miracle. Too often, I think that we miss out on the good thing that God wants to do in us because we're not desperate enough before him. And this man's posture was his power. He let Jesus do what only he could do, and God got the glory for it. Look at Matthew 5, verse 3. It says this, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." I love the Message version of that verse where it says, "You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope, because with less of you, there's more room for God and his rule." This man was at the end of his rope. This man was completely desperate before the Lord. He said, "Have your way, Lord. Have your way." This man's posture of desperate surrender plays a big part in Jesus showing us why he's here and what he wants to do. If we want more of him, it means it's going to have to be a little bit less of us. I mean, the man wasn't healed when Jesus spit. He wasn't healed when the mud got in his eye. He wasn't healed when Jesus spoke and said, "Go." He was healed after he held still long enough and then obeyed. The question that we've got to wrestle with is, are we desperate for God? Are we desperate for God to do a good thing in our life? Are we desperate? Does the posture of our heart place us at the feet of Jesus, saying, "It be your will be done, not mine. You do whatever you need to do, what only you can do, and I'm desperate for you to do it, Jesus"? If so, I believe that the light of the world, Jesus himself, has something incredible in store for all of us. I believe he's got something incredible in store for you. For this man, what was that incredible thing? This man receives his sight. For the very first time he can see. For the very first time. I wish this was the end of the story. I really do. I wish we could kind of put a bow on it right here and not address the rest of the story. But we can't. It's not a happy ever after story just quite yet. There's a little bit more to it. Because we've got the crowd. The crowd is still there. As they saw Jesus again show us exactly who he was and show us why he's there, they're still trying to figure Jesus out. They're still trying to figure out what to do with him. This man was blind his whole life, and for the first time he can see. And what happens to him once he gains his sight? He gets caught in the crossfire from all of these different voices in the crowd. Why? All because he received a miracle from Jesus. Some folks in the crowd, John calls them the neighbors. They were having this debate back and forth on whether or not he was the guy. Some said it was, some said it wasn't, some said, I don't know, it just looks like the guy. They're having this debate back and forth. They're trying to figure out what to do. And as they do this, what do we see the neighbors do towards this blind man? They dismiss him. They dismiss him and only allow him to continue wearing the label from his past. That's hard when that happens to us. I mean, this man has an encounter with Jesus and people want to dismiss the good work that Jesus is doing in his life and go, "No, you're just always the same as you've always been." That's hard. We've also got the man's parents. What did they do? They were so worried about their image and their reputation, so afraid of what other people were going to think of them, So they publicly deny their son, and they say he's not our problem anymore. Like, look, this guy had never seen his parents' face before. And this is the first time that he's looking at his parents. And what does he see or hear his parents say in that moment? He's not our problem. Ask him. They deny him. And then you've got the Pharisees. They ridicule him, they judge him, and they condemn, and they excommunicate him from their society and from the synagogue. Like, this is tough. It's tough for him, but if you put yourself in the seat of the blind man, this is tough when we experience this too. God does something good in our life, and you've got people who want to dismiss that work, who want to keep you at an arm's length and say, we want nothing to do with you. Or they just want to reject, not just you, but reject the work that God has done in you. This is hard. I guess the point that I want to make is following Jesus isn't easy. It's just not. Following Jesus is not easy, but I will tell you this, it's worth it. It's worth it because what Jesus gives us, and we see it right here in the text, what Jesus gives us is greater than anything this world can try to take from us. We all are going to have these moments in our life where we realize following Jesus is not easy. What do we do? What do we do in those moments where this is tough? And we move from it's worth it to, is it worth it? Is it? Here's what I do. I have to look, because it's all of us. I have to look at some people who, my heroes of the faith who've gone before me. And I got to look at some of their lives. I got to look at their lives and listen to their voice and they follow in their footsteps to see, because they've been a little bit further down the road than I have in following Jesus. Right? And that helps me to know, okay, it is worth it. Keep going. That person, one of those people for me is my father-in-law, Pete. Now, I could take up way too much time to talk to you about all the great things about Pete. I love my father-in-law. He is a blessing and a gift. It has been a true gift for 24 years to have a front row seat to someone who is pursuing Jesus with his whole life and his whole heart. Even when it's hard. Because I've seen over the course of the 24 years that I've gotten to know this man, I have seen things be hard in his life. I have seen people in the crowd dismiss him. I have seen people who are close to him deny him and push him away and want nothing to do with him. And I've also seen people reject the work that God's done in his life. I've seen those things happen. And as I've seen it, I continue to see a guy who had a real encounter with Jesus, like a heart change moment with Jesus 40 years ago. And he keeps going. And that's an inspiration and an encouragement to me. We all have these people in our lives. Who are those people for you when it gets difficult following and pursuing after Jesus, that you can look at their footsteps or listen to their words? It says, yep, I got to keep going. This blind guy, he was blind his whole life. He receives his sight, and he watches as his whole life gets kind of burned to the ground in one moment, and everything fades away. And he's left there standing. The crowd kind of moves away, and what happens? Well, here comes Jesus. Here comes Jesus. And what does Jesus do? He looks at him. Don't miss that. Jesus looks at him. Like they're nose to nose, they're eye to eye, they lock eyes with one another. This man gets to look into the eyes of the God of the universe right there in the flesh. And Jesus asks him a question. He asks this question. He says, do you believe in the Son of Man? What's the heart of the question that Jesus is asking this man? The question he's really asking him is, who do you say that I am? It's the question that we've all got to wrestle with. Who do you say that I am? After all that you've seen, after all that you've heard, after all that you've experienced, do you believe? Because the Son of Man is who you are seeing right now with your very own eyes. This man looks at Jesus and he says, I believe. And then it says he worshiped, which means his posture went from here, he couldn't help but control himself, and he went to here. Something about this man's posture, you guys, goals. When your posture is predominantly one of desperation before Jesus, chances are you're going to catch yourself shifting into a position or a posture of worship more times than not. Because the more we place ourselves in a posture of desperation before Jesus, the more likely we're going to see God work in and through our lives. This man receives a double miracle right here on the spot. A double miracle because he had already received his physical sight, but he receives his spiritual sight. The eyes of his heart are opened and his sins are forgiven. The Pharisees, here they come. Here they come. The Pharisees are annoying, and let me tell you why. Okay, this is like an annoying thing for me is like, you know how you're standing in a circle and you're having a conversation with someone? You're not excluding anyone from the conversation, but there's someone who's kind of like on the outside looking in, and you can tell that they're like eavesdropping like this. And then they start chiming in from like an aisle over. You're like, wait, what? What'd you say? Okay, yeah, I guess. Like, okay, that's kind of annoying. That's what the Pharisees are doing here. Because what you have, or who you have, is you've got Jesus. Everybody kind of faded. You've got Jesus, and then you've got this man who was blind. And they're having this moment. And then here come the Pharisees. And they're also annoying because they try to get the last word in. And that's exactly what they do here. Because they got one more thing that they want to say before this scene is done. And what they do is they jump in just long enough to reject Jesus one more time. Which brings us all the way back to the original question that we started with in terms of Jesus' identity and where are we in the story? Because it's not just about who he is, it's about who do you say that he is. Charles Spurgeon has a great quote that's been sticking with me for a while. It's this: the same sun that melts wax hardens clay. What does that mean? The same amount of heat from the sun that melts the wax of a candle hardens the clay. Jesus is as equally close to this man who was blind as he is the Pharisees. And you see one accept Jesus for who he says he is. And you see another reject him. One's posture is here, and the other stays right here. Why do I bring that up? Because that's the question we've got to wrestle with as we sit this close in the story next to Jesus. Like we're right here with the Pharisees, we're right here with this blind man, and here we are, and we've got a decision to make at some point too, right? It's not just about who is he, it's about who do you say he is? Who do you say he is? Is he the light of the world? Is he the Son of Man? Is he the giver of good gifts? Is he the forgiver of our sins? Is he the Messiah and Savior of the world right here in the flesh? That's the question. We saw one reject him and another accept him. And that question is left for us today. Who do you say Jesus is? Let me pray. Jesus, I love you, and I'm grateful for your word. I'm grateful for this, not just a story, but an account that actually happened from history. Because it's the kind of encouragement that we all need today to keep going in pursuit of you. There are some people here who've never had the eyes of their heart opened. I pray for those people right now. I pray that they meet you, that they see who you are, and they see why you're here, and they see not just who you are, but what you offer them. New life, new eyes, a new day, a new hope for all eternity. We love you, we praise you, and our posture is one that bounces back and forth from desperation to worship because you are good. We pray all this in your name, Jesus. Everybody said.